and over 700 neighborhoods in 46 states and 14 countries with a 100% approval record on everything we designed and presented in the last 20 years. Each one of those developments has been a slow evolution. So what you see here tonight is almost 20 years of evolution. This did not happen overnight. Each method that we brought to the market, we tested, we refined, and we evolved. So our goal is, if we can teach the world and provide the knowledge that we gained, we can reduce the world's infrastructure about 30%, make housing more affordable, and make living standards much higher at any income level. So that's the goal of Prefurbia. I'm going to explain to you how these, what we call applications, work. So each one of these is just, it could be knowledge or it could be technology-based, but it's outside the box. The first one I want to show you is flow. What is flow? It's a science of planning and taking into consideration the physical restrictions of a vehicle. In other words, I'll show you how this works. County engineers in Minnesota don't let you have an intersection now a quarter mile apart, less than a quarter mile apart on a county road. So we asked for this existing driveway to connect to a 35-mile-an-hour county road, and they said, no, you have to be a quarter mile apart. You're going to take your cul-de-sac and bring it into the site. Hennepin County tells us there's 10 trips a day for single-family homes, which these are. So we're adding 6.5 miles a day per home, which equates every decade to circling the earth 7 times, burning 11,000 gallons of gas, taking 50 weeks out of those people's lives, to be repeated every decade. We showed this at the council meeting. We got our intersection where we wanted it. We have lost our minds in planning. We have a rule, jump off the cliff, and we do. We don't understand the ramifications. We don't question it. And if we start looking at things from a logical standpoint, things are different. So what we look at in what's called a flow cycle is at 200 foot, it takes soccer mom speed to get a vehicle up to speed. That takes time and energy. The cruise speed is very little energy, very little time, and then there's the slowdown speed if you do stop at a stoplight, that to get the vehicle stopped, that's time. That's 400 feet. You can test it, plus or minus a few feet. That's called a flow cycle. When we look at a plat, and this is New Braunfels, Texas, this plat was approved in 2010. When we look at a plat that is geometrically designed to minimums, which is what this plat was built on, and we look at it from a flow standpoint, you enter and you stop. You go a short distance and you stop. You go a short distance and you stop. Most people have a few flow cycles to get home. Now, we replanned this neighborhood, and it's now open. We replanned it with the same density, with 33% less street length, but from a flow standpoint, everybody gets home with a minimum of flow cycles with a constant rate of speed. So from an energy standpoint and a time standpoint, this is a much better design. From an economic standpoint and an environmental standpoint, we'll go into how this is built later, it's much more effective. So planners, if they start looking at flow, will plan differently. And the benefits from the 3 E's from flow is, of course, less economics, more time to enjoy life. It just feels better. The neighborhood will sell better because you'll drive through a choppy neighborhood. You drive through this, and it just feels better. In fact, the first home buyer was the person who objected the most for the project being built next door when it opened. Low waste, lowering waste. When you plan to minimums, and you'll see, in order to get density, you are thinking in terms of filling your site up with things, because that's what you're paid for if you're a designer. The developer hires you, and your job is to maximize density. And when you're building by numbers, there's an inherent sense of waste. A CAD system, which is what the world uses to design, that creates line work. It doesn't give you spatial data. It doesn't give you the impacts. When you have a spatial system, you can run the numbers, but you could also visualize waste. This development in Ypsilanti, Michigan is to ordinance minimums. And you don't have to imagine how the quality of life here, looking directly into your neighbor's bedroom window, overlooking a sea of parked cars. The developer thinks this maximizes profit. But when you look at it from a waste standpoint, the red street is 100% waste because there's no frontage. The public street could have been fronted, but they didn't ask. The yellow streets or the pink streets are 50% fronted. There is 70% waste in this design. So we can run the numbers. We could see that if you have the right technology and if you have the right training. So 70% of that pavement is waste. When we redesigned it, we just took the waste out, and this isn't even a great plan. We did this years ago, but it's a much nicer neighborhood to live in. We have 7 more units. Knowing what we did today, the numbers would even be better. But it's a nicer place to live. That's the important thing. When we look at Fargo, and all these photographs are Fargo, what you've done, and there's more pavement being introduced in that little green space in between the 2 units. Why wasn't the units just spread out and then nonlinear? It would have reduced the pavement, made it more connected. That's just one little example, is when we think in terms of just numbers, we lose track of the opportunities. Does anybody here see where the waste is in this plan? You see it? Where is it? What's that? The road in the middle. Right. There is no frontage on that road. It's not a major road. You could have fronted it. 100% waste. What does that cost? $150 a linear foot. It's or $200 a linear foot. It's $150,000. That raised the price of every home by $3,700. That could have paid for an inch of foam insulation and a 95% efficient HVAC to get your utility bill a third. And the city's got to maintain that forever. Right, there's your waste. If we condition designers and teach them to recognize waste, all of a sudden they'll recognize waste everywhere. Architecture, everything. It's not just in planning, but that has to be taught. The next thing, coving. Coving was our invention. It's like neighborhood art. But what's cool about coving, the first time in planning, we gained efficiency by exceeding ordinance minimums. That's why we have a 100% approval record. Typically, we don't ask for anything. Now, the way this works, does anybody know why that bubble exists? That big chunk of pavement? You're going like that. Why? Gives access to more homes. What it does is it stretches that setback line. The density goes up, the more length the setback line. And when you think in terms of the ordinance, this is 20-foot minimum front yard in Omaha, where this is, you would think, engineers and designers think it's 20-foot absolute. It doesn't say that. It says 20-foot minimum. So you can go beyond the minimum, separate the relationship of home front to street, and you don't have to build as much pavement. That doesn't say absolute. That says minimum in every ordinance. You can go beyond that. So this is in, I think, West Fargo. None of those had to be built. This design could have happened without a single one of those being built. I can't even imagine what that cost, that adds each home price. That's a lot of pavement. So we could reduce, by eliminating waste or reducing it and taking full advantage of the frontage and coving, we can reduce street length anywhere from 15 to 60% and maintain the density without reducing a single minimum. It's an entirely different model to look at development, and from there we've made the other discoveries. The other thing that coving does is the home is no longer parallel to the street. So not only does it feel less dense because you have a lot more space, front, side, and rear, but because the home's on an angle, you're no longer looking directly at your neighbor. Most people are looking at an angle, so the line of sight from within the home, front, side, and rear, extends beyond a normal plat at the same density. So it benefits from both inside and outside. And we could do some cool things like get view sheds completely through the site. The cul-de-sacs are now the sign of evil suburbia, but in the documentation you read about sustainability, cul-de-sacs are very evil. And when we look at it, this is a Minnesota cul-de-sac, and in Minnesota we have a fire engine that takes 60-foot radius to turn around on the right-of-way, and it's probably the same here. In the south, that same fire engine somehow turns in the 50-foot radius. I haven't figured that out. We have 25-foot front yards and 80-foot lot width, similar to what you probably got in this area. And so you're going to get 4 or 5 homes on a cul-de-sac. The walks go nowhere, and the fact is the consumers love them. The developers love them. You've built a massive chunk of pavement in front of the home, but you've got higher value. It makes more money. And it continues to make more money as they resell. So here's the Fargo area cul-de-sac. You got a nice walk north of there. You're not getting to that walk because everybody built a fence. So it's the same kind of situation. What if you made every dimension bigger? Keep in mind that radius was for a fire engine to turn around. It's not the optimum design. What if we made it a bigger radius, made that street one way, because that's how you're going to drive anyhow, gave it more setback. We've doubled the amount of cul-de-sac lots. We plummeted the amount of pavement. We added an 8,800 square foot park. We took that 6-foot wide walk out to the rest of the neighborhood. That walk, when it leaves the cul-de-sac, can handle an emergency vehicle. So now you don't even have emergency problems. And we solve a lot of problems, and we made it more efficient than the grid, and it's the exact same density as the other cul-de-sac. We haven't given up one unit. What's that park look like in the middle? This is one in San Antonio. It could be a place for people to gather. It could be, and here's one in Sauk Rapids, Minnesota. It could be there where your rain gardens are. Or it could be a combination of almost anything. Depends on what you want it to be. So exceeding minimums is kind of a new idea, but we can gain efficiency, and then what's the argument when we go into the Planning Commission? We don't have to ask for anything. We exceeded, says what they wanted. So it's kind of different. And even if we lost a few lots, if we reduce the infrastructure by 30, 40, 50%, who cares? The developer is in a much better position to be profitable because the cost of development will eat up the profits. Pedestrian-oriented design, what do we mean by that? When you look at this, again, Fargo area development, there's a walk that goes to that park, 600 foot from that home, but you got to walk a half a mile to get to that connection. You have walks everywhere. 4-foot wide walks, maybe less than that, everywhere, but you have street patterns that are not that well connected. That means you have walk patterns that are not that well connected, and where are you